All right, Director Wells, Secretary Voiles, I think we're ready to get started if you all are ready.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. Matt, Karen, I think for the purposes of expediency, and instead of going down the roll, we'll just ask folks to drop their name and their organization in the chat. That'll save us some time.
Okay.
So Wheeler, unless you've got any other housekeeping bits you want to tackle up top, we can go ahead and get rolling.
I'm good if you are.
All right, well, I want to welcome everyone to our quarterly meeting of the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee. I believe the secretary is on, and so I'm going to toss it over to him to officially gavel us in, and then I will take it back and get us through the agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks everyone for joining us virtually. I think you heard Matt and saying to drop your name and affiliation into the chat just so we get all that registered as we go through. But thank you all for joining this morning. I'll be in and out, so I'm going to let Matt and the DCR team take over, and this will actually be the last meeting of the Coastal TAC, where the CRO or the secretary is lead, and then consistent with the legislation from this past session. Delegate Hernandez's HB 1458, the management of the TAC will actually formally transition to DCR beginning this next fiscal year. So I'm sure they are excited about that, and along with all the other provisions in the recent legislation that we're working on. So with that, I'll just turn it back over to Director Wells.
Great, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So we're gonna roll through the agenda. I actually have to duck out a little bit early for today, and so Matt Dallin is gonna take over and drive and close us out after the 10:30 break. Quick housekeeping on my part: if you want to be recognized or speak, if you just use the raise hand or send a chat, we can probably handle it that way. And so if no one else has anything they want to do up top, we will move to the adoption of the agenda. If I could get someone to just unmute and move adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt the agenda.
That's on Mark. Got to get a second.
Yeah.
Second.
See Peter and Troy second. All right. Any discussion? Not hearing any. If folks could vote, go off mute and say aye if you approve adopting the minutes.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Agenda is adopted. We'll move on to the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting, which were distributed. If I could get a motion to adopt the minutes.
So moved, Louis.
See Louis move. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second from Andrew. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of adopting the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, hearing none, the minutes are adopted. We will move on to updates from DCR. And I think, Matt, you've got the first slide to talk about some changes in your office.
I do. Thank you, Director Wells. Hello, everybody. We have some exciting news. I think we've announced it in most of the subcommittee meetings, but also wanted to announce it here, that we have a third member of the Office of Resilience Planning. Arthur Kay has joined us. He's been with DCR for I think 7 or 8 years, previously working with the divisions of dam safety and floodplain management. So we're excited to have Arthur on our team. He may have been in contact with you, helping get some of our planned resilience actions into the Web Explorer, and is also helping us with some of our data management and, more importantly, data sharing with you all, so that you can use this information in your own efforts. So happy to have Arthur aboard and on the team.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
I know Matt and Carolyn are excited to increase their their staffing by 50%. Arthur, we're happy to have you in the new position. We will move on to the next slide. Legislative update. Secretary Voiles mentioned legislation that passed this year that deals with how we handle resilience writ large in the Commonwealth. I think many of you are aware this is the outgrowth of a year-long stakeholder process. A number of you all participated in that, contributed to it, supported it. So I wanted to say thank you to all of you for that. For those of you who follow the General Assembly, this bill had a winding and sometimes treacherous path to get through, but appreciate everybody's support. So broadly, the bill seeks to restructure our Chief Resilience Officer position into a more broad all hazards position that functions as sort of the center of a hub and spoke approach, where the agencies retain their programmatic and staffing functions as it relates to resilience. So DCR will continue to handle floodplain and flood planning. VDEM will continue to do disaster management. DHCD will continue to do housing. So all the agencies will retain their individual equities, but supporting the coordination of that, you will have a Chief Resilience Officer. The position will sit under the Secretary of Resources. There was funding in the final budget to actually fund the position, which to date was not funded, along with 2 additional folks to establish an Office of Commonwealth Resilience. So really excited about that. One of the ways that we will support the coordination cooperation across agencies is through the formation of an interagency resilience management team. So there are a number of agencies that are identified in statute to identify a resilience coordinator. Those coordinators will meet on a quarterly basis. The CRO will head that up. And the goal there is to keep everyone talking to each other, because one of the things that we quickly realized just from bringing the Resilience Coordination Working Group together was that there was a lot of value just to getting everybody in a room, and that really wasn't happening. So the bill makes a couple of other changes. It sort of reframes the status of flood resilience report as a status of resilience report that will roll up a number of other reports to sort of be a broad summary of what's going on with resilience in the Commonwealth. Related to this group, the bill will sunset the Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee next February. So the goal will be, obviously, we produce the updated Coastal Resilience Master Plan at the end of the year, gave ourselves a little bit of cushion in case we need to meet again for whatever reason. And then it will sunset this group and establish in its place a statewide Virginia Flood Resilience Advisory Committee. We structured that group a little bit differently. The core committee will primarily be state agencies, but there are a whole list of stakeholders that are identified in statute as being essentially partners that the group is required to engage with. So we're trying to both reflect the statewide nature of the problem, the statewide nature of the report, and structure a attack in a way that is still functional and not so big that it kind of collapses under its own weight. So the statute does specifically speak to setting up subcommittees. So we will pursue that. We will probably try to get ahead of the game a little bit to start moving on this in an administrative fashion prior to February 1, since that'll be coming somewhat late in the game for the statewide report that's due at the end of the year. As the Secretary mentioned, we are sort of swapping some roles, and so consistent with the hub and spoke approach I mentioned, DCR will take ownership of both the coastal TAC and the statewide TAC when it stands up. Not on the slide, but of interest, I think, to this group. The bill also codifies a number of the administrative transparency initiatives that we undertook with regards to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund. So that codifies the advisory review committee that we pulled together to help review applications. So happy to be able to sort of enshrine those in statute for the future. A little bit of news for today. We are planning on putting the CFPF manual out for public comment. That should come today. We are basing the comment draft on the round 4 manual since folks actually know how that works in practice. So look for that coming up on Town Hall. And we certainly look forward to people's feedbacks. We do anticipate making some changes. We flagged some of those in a cover letter that we were particularly interested in getting some feedback on. But thought that since folks know how the round 4 manual worked, that we would start there for round 5. So any questions about HB 1458 or where we're headed with our CRO position? All right. Matt, I think you're up, or Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you, Director Wells. Wanted to give you all some updates on our consulting teams for phase 2. In February of this year, we entered into long-term contracts with 4 firms to provide resilience planning and consulting services. Since then, we've been engaging with them and entering into task order contracts to support our different work efforts. What we have outlined here are the firms that are working with us for the coastal plan and delivering those products. So we have multiple firms involved that we are helping manage and coordinate. Dewberry is continuing their work from phase 1 and is working on the flood hazard data, the updated impact assessment. They helped us with the end user survey analysis and then are helping us with both the Web Explorer and then also enhancing the impact assessment to try to get to some more financial needs and some economic impacts. We'll talk about a little bit of that later. We've brought on the Stantec and launch team to help us with engagement. They're here today and you'll be engaging with them later. They'll be leading some of our discussion regarding our recommendations. They're also responsible for our final report design and production. And with that, they're reviewing the data that Dewberry is producing, reviewing the plans, projects, and initiatives that are in our Web Explorer to help support that plan, production, and design. We also have an AECOM team helping us with our public outreach campaign. For this plan, helping us with outreach specifically for underserved community meetings that are coming up later this year. AECOM will be also doing all of our outreach for both the coastal plan and the statewide plan so that we have consistent messaging and products that are public facing. So that you may be hearing from multiple members of different teams that DCR will try to create introductions, but do not be surprised if some of the contractors reach out as we move forward to get input on this plan documents and the work that we're doing here. All right. So I wanted to give you all an update on where we're at with phase 2 of the coastal plan. Just kind of top level, this is what we are working on and how we're planning on delivering it. So there's 5 key components to this plan, and we'll get into them a little bit later, but top level, where is the flooding and all major sources of flooding, which is rainfall driven flooding, riverine flooding, or coastal flooding. What is that flooding impact? What are we doing about it? And that's our planned resilience actions, the different projects and initiatives that we have. What are our financial needs for flood resilience? That's coming from that plans and initiatives, and what is the need to implement those, as well as some more economic impacts. And then lastly is our subcommittee recommendations, or the TAC recommendations that we've been working on in the subcommittees and will continue to work on and get those ready to be finalized in the Q4 meeting. All of these components are being presented in 2 major components. One is our PDF document plan, and then a second component is the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer to help share that information. This is where we're at with the schedule, finding ourselves here in the middle of June and needing to deliver the plan by the end of this calendar year. We're wrapping up the flood hazard data and impact assessment and are moving into that planned resilience actions analysis. We've been working to try to get more projects and initiatives in and helping provide some technical assistance to get those entries into our database so that we can include them in the plan. Working on financial needs for flood resilience, you'll see that this task extends beyond the delivery date, because we see, based on some of the needs that came out of the subcommittee, there's some discrete support and more technical assistance and guidance that we can provide that doesn't necessarily need to be in the plan itself, but that's kind of a continued effort. Similarly, with our outreach and engagement extends beyond the plan delivery, because we can plan to have continued outreach and engagement, both to promote the plan once it's released, but to continue to gather feedback on what's working, what are the needs, so that we can continue to improve and prepare for our next plan in 5 years. So we're going to go through some of these different updates here. Carolyn and I will go back and forth to let you all know where we stand with the plan products. So again, we are working on the major sources of flooding, which is a major improvement from phase 1, which just focused on coastal flooding, whether it be tidal flooding or storm surge flooding. Phase 2 includes our riverine flooding or fluvial flooding, and then our rainfall driven flooding or pluvial flooding, which was identified in phase 1 as the greatest unknown and biggest gap in our planning effort, is not having that rainfall driven flooding. So that's a gap we are seeking to close. All of those sources of flooding are combined into our planning scenarios. So this figure shows what our planning scenarios going to be. We have 2 different time horizons or planning horizons: a near future, so what's going on the next 30 years or so, and then a far future, which brings us out to the end of the century. Within each planning scenario, we have 2 different risk tolerances. So a moderate risk tolerance is kind of our baseline of what we should be planning for. And then there's a low risk tolerance scenario within each time frame. So if you have a low risk tolerance, that means you don't have a lot of adaptive capacity, or there could be widespread impacts based on flooding. So we want to be a little bit more conservative. And so there we're using higher levels of flooding, whether it be from coastal flooding and going out further with our coastal resilience master plan data, or on the pluvial side, using the 90th percentile confidence interval of the Marissa data to capture that wider range of possibilities to get us to a low risk tolerance. On the fluvial side, we are just using the FEMA data because that is what is available. We are aware that FEMA is releasing their Federal Flood Risk Management Standard data sometime later this year, but it's not going to be available to be incorporated into the planning document at this time. So this is the data that will be used to create these planning scenarios to help highlight what those impacts are during the different time horizons and under the different risk tolerance scenarios. Wanted to highlight the pluvial flood hazard data that has been completed. What you see here are all of the sub HUC 12 watersheds that have been modeled as part of this effort. So there's over 1,800 models that all have a rain on grid HEC-RAS 2D model that's available. These models are currently available for download and use. We are working on a use case guide to help highlight some of the potential uses of this data, both the depth grids and the models, for other efforts, whether it's a planning effort or helping provide some guidance and early design work. There are multiple uses for this data that we want to highlight. And later this month, we have some virtual workshops scheduled to gather some more input from potential end users to identify what different types of use cases could be included in this use case guide. This use case guide can be a living document too that we can continue to add on to. So I think this has really been a great accomplishment. Thank Dewberry for all their efforts here in producing this. And this is kind of the backbone for our pluvial flood hazard planning scenarios and creating that data. So it's been a great accomplishment to get this data available. And a big thing here is that this takes it from kind of the coastal resilience master plan, which focused just on coastal flooding. Now this is a flooding resilience plan for the coastal region and includes the major sources of flooding all across our 8 coastal PDCs. So it's much more inclusive, whereas before we were kind of just focused just along the shorelines here. So a great advancement, and I'm excited to have this data in the plan and making this data available for our end users and other stakeholders in the region. I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn to give us an update on the impact assessment.
Sure. Good morning. So we kind of talked through a comprehensive update on the impact assessment data, the asset data that has been identified and inventory to go into the impact assessment at our last meeting. So this meeting is a little light. This is the only slide I have on impact assessment, and that's because Dewberry is actively working on running that assessment and summarizing the data alongside Stantec, who has come on board to kind of take the asset outputs and translate that into data summarizations and stories to include in the plan. So both the two kind of center blocks on the screen here are both in progress at the moment. And we'll have a more comprehensive update to share both with the project prioritization subcommittee and also with the full TAC at our in the future, either in the meetings or between meetings, since I know we are continuously kind of moving towards focusing on recommendations development. So a brief update on the impact assessment there. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Carolyn. Building on that impact assessment and based on our engagement and feedback from you all, we've heard that our end users want to know more dollar figures in the plan, because that's what really helps drive action and moves this forward. So some of the updates that we have for phase 2 within the impact assessment, we're going to have average annualized loss. We had this in phase 1, but this is going to be extended also to pluvial flooding. It will not include fluvial flooding because we just have the one return period, the 1% or the 100-year flood. So that will not be able to be included, but we will have it for coastal and pluvial flooding. We are also going to include ecosystem service loss. So where we're losing lands to permanent inundation, where the potential of loss of lands to permanent inundation. What is that? Not only loss in acres, but what is the potential loss in the ecosystem service benefits through that conversion of land? We're also looking at regional economic impacts and taking those average annualized loss and kind of expanding that into indirect losses or regional economic impacts for each PDC region. And then we're also looking at the local real estate tax revenue impacts from flooding and again from permanent inundation, and what may be removed from the tax roll and what that additional burden would be on the localities if we are still to maintain that level of revenue across the locality. We did receive feedback from our funding, especially on the real estate tax revenue impacts, on trying to get some more time series dependent data to track this over time. So we don't have that data right now to include it in the plan. And I think that's been incorporated into one of the recommendations. But that we know, especially we've heard from Middle Peninsula, that this is already happening where land values are decreasing and expected to, or it's not expected, but likely coming from flooding impacts and a reduction in land value. So we've heard that impact. It's in the recommendations, and we're kind of thinking about how we could try to capture that in the future to track that. In addition to kind of the direct impacts and the dollars, we're also looking to provide some additional contextual information And looking at additional local economic capacities and indices, we use the fiscal stress index in phase 1 and are looking at some additional indices that exist to try to provide some context to some of the challenges and opportunities that exist with different localities as far as implementing resilience actions. We're also looking at larger ecosystem service, the baseline benefits of what we had in here. This was previously titled baseline valuation, but based on input we've received at our subcommittee, have revised this to be baseline benefits and not wanting to confuse or misrepresent what these dollar figures represent. So appreciate that input at the subcommittee meeting. We're also working on our planned resilience actions and getting dollar figures for the projects and initiatives. And again, we're still trying to get some final projects and initiatives into the Web Explorer, and then also updating and refining the data that we do have, especially with those dollar figures, because our collection of those dollar figures helps us represent the overall regional need for resilience actions. So thank you to those that have already provided us with that data, and for those that we continue to engage with to get that information in there. A couple other additional updates for phase 2. We are updating the funding database as part of the Web Explorer. So we've had some minor updates to the funding database in this calendar year. After we created the user portal, we've been able to add a couple extras. We are working with our contractors to review this current list, to update it, and then have some continuous updates as we move forward, so that this is more of a living database, and are also evaluating how this information is presented in the Web Explorer itself. We are also working on mapping the multiple financial focal areas that exist through different funding opportunities, whether it's EJ40, economic resilience zones, low-income geographic areas, any type of preferential funding area that has either reduced cost share or preference for some of these fundings. We're trying to put this all together in one map. That way we can try to see where those funding opportunities exist, where do our flooding challenges exist, to try to figure out and maximize the implementation of projects to address the risk with some of these different funding opportunities. I'm gonna hand it
Hey,
back.
Matt, before you move on, I saw Rachel Peabody had a comment in the chat. I don't know, Rachel, if you wanted to flag that or if you just want to leave it where it is there.
Yeah, either way, it really, rather than just trying to go after losses, I mean, I think ecosystems are going to change and the values of those ecosystems are going to be different, but in some areas there's maybe losses, in some areas they may not be. So it might just be semantics, but we're just looking for the delta. We're looking for the change there.
That's a great point, Rachel. No, you're right. They just don't disappear into the ether. They're converting to something else, and that other type of ecosystem also has benefits. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt has already started to talk about what we're doing with the projects and initiatives inventory and the planned resilience actions analysis. I'm just going to expand on that a little bit and then give an update on where we're at with our outreach and engagement for the plan. So on the planned resilience actions side, here's our overall schedule for this item. We're working with Stantec to kind of review the data and decide where we're going to focus for data quality improvements. So that is complete, that first column of actions. We're currently working on those data improvements. So as Matt has mentioned, we're reaching out to folks to get more information into the Web Explorer and into that inventory to represent those projects and initiatives, and also just to improve the information that we have, including with cost data, but also with in some other areas that I'll talk more about in a minute. From there, we'll be running an analysis on the data that we do have and summarizing that information for our final plan. And additionally, that information will continue to appear in the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer, which will be updated. So next slide. So in terms of what we have so far, what we've got in the Web Explorer and what we're working with for projects and initiative submissions, we have 681 entries. The majority of those are projects as compared to initiatives, and you can see the breakdown of those project types on that pie chart on the right. More than 3/4 of the projects that we have in the Web Explorer were submitted back in 2021 with a phase 1 plan. So the majority of those projects in there are actually things that were collected back for phase 1. And nearly all of those submissions were made by either planning district commissions or local governments. So one area we've already identified and discussed with this group is looking at state agency actions and getting some more of those, as well as other actors, for example, universities. Most of the projects that are in the Web Explorer, we do ask and request information about the purpose, what sort of flood hazard the projects are addressing. And the majority of those projects are addressing stormwater flooding. Many of them address more than one flooding challenge, but when selecting among those, stormwater flooding is the most common project purpose. And then most of the initiatives for their end have multiple purposes. Among the least common of those purposes are funding capacity, ecosystem resilience, and economic resilience. Next slide. So when we go to summarize this information in the plan, the last slide was kind of an initial summary of what we learned from the data so far. What we're hoping to do for the plan and what's contained in the plan is to provide two major kind of areas of summarization and analysis. First, themes and trends. So looking at things like action types and subtypes, what sort of hazards are addressed and what's the purpose of those actions. What are the project costs, but also considering the cost within the frame of reference of the project type and the scale of benefits of that project. We had some discussion about that item at our project prioritization subcommittee, our last meeting. And then also the geographic distribution of those projects. On the opportunities and gaps side, we want to look at, where are there areas where there is high flood risk and or elevated social vulnerability, where there are no planned resilience actions. So we can kind of pinpoint those areas, and then what opportunities might exist for coordination, either based on projects that are similar in their location and their purpose, particularly on the physical project side, but also on the project type. For example, we may have multiple localities that are interested in developing resilient design standards, and maybe there's an opportunity for coordination there and knowledge sharing. So the key data improvements that are currently underway are listed here on the screen. We want to make sure that the data is complete, particularly in areas where we have high flood risk. So thinking back to that previous slide, we want to make sure that we're not overlooking projects and initiatives and calling those out in areas of high flood risk where maybe just we find out our data is incomplete. We will also want to make sure we're consolidating duplicate projects and initiatives. So of course we don't want to have multiple records in there and double count information. We're trying to, as has already been mentioned, expand information about costs so that we can summarize the financial need. We have a lot of projects currently in the Web Explorer and in the inventory that have other selected as a subtype. And so we want to try to understand why that's the case, and if possible, attempt to recategorize those into our existing or new potentially categorization. And then also we want to improve the spatial extents of project locations and kind of associated the accuracy of the scale of benefits. So where is the project physically located, but then also what are the benefits? Where's the geographic area where those benefits will be felt? So that's all I've got on the plan resilience actions analysis side of the projects and initiatives inventory. Shifting gears a little bit, to give a quick update on stakeholder outreach and engagement for the plan. As has been discussed in previous meetings, we have developed an outreach and engagement strategy for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2. The summary of the different activities that are underway are listed on the screen here. The first three listed are ongoing activities that are continuing to be in progress, and the remainder are more discrete activities that are underway or planned for the remainder of the planning process. I'm going to share some more information about three of these items in particular the locality meetings, the community meetings. So that's number 6, number 9. And then also a public outreach campaign that we're working with AECOM to develop to promote the various activities that are geared toward more public audiences. So you'll see under the 4th column from the left, the stakeholders column, some of those are listed as public, including participatory mapping, virtual public meetings, and the public comment period, as well as the underserved communities will all be included in this public outreach campaign for the plan. Next slide. So for our locality meetings, we have been hosting workshops with local government staff in areas that have higher flood risk comparatively and also historically lower engagement in this coastal resilience master planning process in order to understand their challenges with flooding, as well as gather more information on their projects and initiatives to include in that planned resilience actions analysis. So we've completed 2 of these meetings so far. We met with Crater PDC localities in May and then met yesterday with Plan RBA localities. Thank you to the PDCs for helping us to organize and attend those meetings. And we have 2 more coming up next week, 2 in Hampton Roads, kind of targeting, we know there's localities in Hampton Roads that are very engaged in this process, but targeting some of those that have been less engaged historically. So meeting with those local government staff next week, and we are producing some summaries of those meetings to be able to share feedback back with you all about some of the findings that are coming out of those discussions. Next slide. Secondly, the community meetings. So this is kind of a major update from our last meeting. We have identified areas where we want to host community meetings based on work that we've been conducting with AECOM. So our criteria for identifying locations of these meetings was to look at areas meeting the Community Flood Preparedness Fund's definition of underserved that are also at greatest flood risk. For those areas that we identified based on overlapping kind of social vulnerability index from the CDC and FEMA's National Risk Index for flood hazard data, we then looked at whether or not there was already extensive flood resilience engagement underway in that particular geography. You can see here the kind of A and B options. If there was already extensive engagement underway, or we think that there is extensive engagement underway, our plan of action has been identified to partner with local governments to understand what information they've already collected, potentially also identify if they are already planning to meet with local, the local communities that we're interested in hearing about. And rather than having our own community meetings and kind of going out to the same communities again, asking similar questions, leverage that information that already exists. Option B, if we find that there is not already extensive flood resilience engagement underway, then we would work to identify community-based organizations in the geography that we're interested in, and then co-host meetings in those areas, hopefully with those community-based organizations. So Matt, if you can click again, there will be an update to this slide, I think. So these are from the analysis, the areas that we have identified as areas where we would potentially like to co-host those meetings to pursue option B. Next slide.
Carolyn, this is Louis, can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
If you can back up a little bit, it may be worthwhile for you all to talk a little bit more with the PDCs in these rural communities about where these low income areas actually are. If you stay at that census tract level, you're going right past massive amounts of low income citizens that are just masked by the wealthy people that live on the waterfront. And if you can't drill down to that block or block group level, you're just missing them completely. And that's always been a challenge with most of these types of analysis. If they operate at that track level, you're just not going to find them. And that's most unfortunate in these rural areas. And it sends it's an odd looking map when we know where, folks are land rich, cash poor. The Census Bureau, whenever they do updates, they change the configuration. They will compress and then they will expand and they will move block groups around. So in the last census, we had, for example, Lower Guinea, which is in Gloucester, is our subsistence community fishing area, which is basically 1 foot above sea level. And they did away with the block groups there. So they rolled them up into tracts, and all of a sudden, all of the poor people just disappeared. But they're still there, but they just disappeared from the metrics. And it has to do with the way that the Census Bureau tracks it. And so I would just caution you all, when you're looking at that highest level geography, you're not going to get what you think you're getting.
Thanks, Louis. Yeah, I think there are definitely limitations where we need information about both flood risk and social vulnerability, and trying to crosswalk that information at a scale that makes sense across the entire region to identify priority localities. We certainly, or not localities, geographies, we certainly recognize there are limitations. So appreciate the recommendation for us to follow up with PDCs on these areas and see if there's potentially additional geographies that could be looped into some of these identified areas, or if these areas need to be shifted as well.
Zip code boundaries will work for that. The Census Bureau data can pull over to zip code boundaries, and it will give you a completely different picture. So if you're operating at the block group and zip code configuration, you still apply the exact same definition. You're just pulling it to the polygons of block groups and zip codes.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions on this slide? The next slide is the same, just a summary of a tabular summary.
Carolyn, which exactly were the metrics from FEMA NRI were used in determining this?
So we used their flood risk metrics for all flood hazard sources. So not only coastal flooding, which is of course a limitation with using our own Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 1 data. So they have kind of identified metrics for losses based on a few different factors. I can send some more details on the exact methodology and rating.
Okay, thank you.
I see there's a couple of comments in the chat. If Molly or Jess, if you want to come off mute and share those.
Yeah, I don't think that there's very much to add. I just wanted to highlight that this, exactly what Louis said, is a problem in urban areas as well. And I suspect that the census tract issue is one of the reasons that, frankly, the FEMA NRI does some very strange things compared to what we see on the ground in Virginia. And honestly, I'm a little bit skeptical of that NRI and its long-term verification as a metric here. It would be interesting to try to rerun some of that data using zip code boundaries and see what happened.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that we're very excited about is with a statewide plan, being able to create an expanded methodology for the whole state, using not necessarily NRI data, because we know there are limitations, including that it is not forward-looking. It doesn't include any information about future flood risk. And so with the statewide plan, we are anticipating including an aspect of that which looks at intersections of social vulnerability and flood risk that do not need to rely on exclusively or perhaps at all on FEMA NRI data. So that is something that is a work in progress. I think we, with this coastal plan, do have limitations of wanting to have meetings and not wanting to spend all of our time trying to rerun analysis and kind of move forward where we can, but also looking ahead to getting feedback and collaborating on a methodology that will work statewide moving forward.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Molly.
No, I just wanted to add to that, Carolyn. I think you're on the right track there. One of the things that we'd looked at and we started at piloting in the Northern Neck was to get the localities, because sometimes it's actually even like small communities, towns that aren't captured in any big kind of thing, and then it throws the metrics all off, right? So if you look through the Northern Neck, it's sometimes very hard to find the communities that need help using these big viewers. But to actually have them identify it, and it takes someone time, unfortunately, and that's the big problem because localities are overworked, right? But they know where these communities are. And just having them circle it on a map, I think, is a really good start.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. I think we can certainly keep that in mind for areas of future effort and maybe something to work into subcommittee recommendations, outreach and coordination subcommittee in particular, maybe keep that some of what we're discussing here in mind as we look ahead. So Matt, if you could go to the next slide. So this is just a different view of how we've kind of looked at areas that were prioritized based on the analysis that we did conduct as being both high flood risk and high social vulnerability. And in the right-hand column, the approach between A and B, either learning from those existing efforts and partnering with those, or B, co-hosting a meeting instead. So you can see the breakdown here of those areas. The one area that we're still determining a path forward in is Newport News. Southern area of Newport News was identified. We do know that Newport News is doing extensive flood resilience planning, and so want to have a conversation with those who are familiar with that effort and with the city to determine whether it would be advantageous for us to pursue either option A or option B in this location. We're certainly interested in feedback on this list, particularly from those who are currently engaging, or perhaps this is within your planning district commission or you work here. So I'm certainly interested in feedback on these areas. Okay. On the public outreach campaign side, as I mentioned, we've been working with AECOM to develop this campaign. Our key strategies are shown on the left. Again, these are more targeted toward areas where we're trying to reach the general public. So with the Flood Story app, with our public webinars, and also with the public comment period in particular, wanting to work through the 4 key strategies toward the bottom. And then that top strategy, develop partnerships for community meetings, is really meant to help us as we work toward hosting those meetings that we've been talking about for the past couple of slides. You can see the list of tactics on the right, various different promotional methods. I think they'll all look pretty familiar, trying to reach audiences in different ways to share information about the planning process, opportunities to be engaged, and the plan itself. So we are finishing up the campaign strategy and going to start working on actual implementation here, hopefully in the next month or so. And that is all I've got for updates. I'll open it up to the TAC for any further questions or discussion on any part of the updates on the Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2.
All right, not hearing any other comments or questions. We'll go ahead and move on to the next part of the agenda. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, TAC members, for the input. So next up is our recommendations development. I'm going to hand this over to Linda from Launch to lead us through this. We have about 30 to 45 minutes kind of blocked out for this discussion. Afterwards, we will take a break and then resume with some of our new business items. So Linda, go ahead and hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Linda Warren from Launch Consulting on the Stantec team, and I'll be facilitating this part where we're going to talk a little bit about recommendation development and also get your input for the very first time to see what the different subcommittees were starting to come up with on recommendations. So let's dive in. Next slide. And I do ask you to pull up, there's a handout that DCR has sent to you. And that handout, it's called Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee, Initial Subcommittee Recommendations from Q2 Meetings. It's about 12 pages long, and hopefully you have that. And that will be very helpful, a helpful tool in our discussion today. So there's 4 subcommittees, of course, with outreach and coordination, project prioritization, funding, and research data and innovation. And all 4 of them were hard at work in their meetings to come up with some very helpful initial recommendations. So we'll go on to the next slide. And in doing these subcommittee recommendations, the idea is to identify what opportunities are there to improve mitigation of these severe and repetitive flooding issues in the coastal region. So that could be actions to implement in the next planning phase. So that's the next 4 years or so. And also the planning process improvements. What can we do better along the way? The audience of these recommendations, it could be state government, it could be the planning district commissions, local governments, or others. Kind of big picture, not minute for the audience. And those recommendations, we asked for the implementation actions for them. They all start with a verb to identify the intended audience in general terms. So we wouldn't say in particular, one particular organization like VDEM, it would be state agencies in general. And so what we're aiming for by October or so is to get some final 3 to 5 recommendations per subcommittee. That way we can have 20 recommendations that will go into the plan. And then for the presentation of this, we're going to have a section in the final plan document that will provide those, and they will be recommendations of the public body here. So that's the general background. The way they were developed so far, we want this to be very collaborative as a process. And so we've had some interactions with the subcommittee members during their subcommittee meetings. And just a note, if you feel passionate about different types of recommendations as a subcommittee member, you are welcome to join other subcommittee meetings as well. So feel free to interact in that way. And so here's the pathway as we're doing it from the quarters. So in Q2, we did the initial brainstorm. And right now, today, we're reviewing these overlaps and we're going to identify gaps, again, in general, and I'll explain more on the next slides. At that point, then, we'll be ready. We'll have a survey that's going to go out. And then by Q3, when we meet again as subcommittees, we can prioritize, revise, and really hone those recommendations, looking at the priorities, so that by Q4, when we meet, we'll be able to finalize and vote on them. And then it will come to the full TAC for a vote. So we'll get everything done well in time to include it in the plan before December. These are going to be informed, of course, these recommendations by prior TAC discussions that you had, certainly by the phase 1 plan, by stakeholder engagement as we go along, and then of course the TAC member surveys that will happen and have happened. So the final recommendations, as the subcommittees do them, will be followed by the recommendations from the TAC. All right, next slide. So doing this process, many of you participated in, we had in May, the different subcommittee meetings, and we came up with what we're going to term the raw recommendations. So in the interacting of the groups, we had sticky notes, people could write recommendations down. And we took all those and we brought them into a list. And then what we did from there is what you have in your handout. And so we're going to take a look and review for the first time today, all of the different basic, from the themes of the subcommittees, we're going to take a look at what might cross over. So we're not diving into the language of those recommendations yet themselves, just really the overall common topic areas of those recommendations. Next slide. So we began with themes for each of the subcommittees. And in that, we were able to have about 30 raw recommendations from each of those different subcommittees. And that's what those numbers are here. 29, 34, all of them about 30, you could say. And then to help, just for the purposes of brainstorming, we have these different themes, 3 to 4 themes for each of the subcommittees. But in no way are we tied to those themes going forward. Those themes don't have to stick around as themes. What we're doing now is we're looking at common topic areas that may have fallen within those themes to go forward. Any questions so far? Okay, let's keep going. So here's our preview of recommendations by subcommittee. And there's a slide for each subcommittee. So we'll start with the first one. In live and living color from the Research Data and Innovation Subcommittee, here are the themes. And then each of those themes, we're talking about a topic area. And you'll notice that these topic areas will correspond, of course, to what you have in a handout if you wanted to see the raw recommendations that were categorized within them. But in general, for research, data, innovation, and anything other that didn't fall within one of those themes, here are numbered what we were calling common topic areas. So I'll just give you a moment to take a look at this. Have a look at what some of these common topic areas are. And after we go through all of these 4 slides on subcommittees, then we're going to talk about what overlaps may exist. There's just a few seconds for reading. So a lot of these common topic areas, they are certainly directly around research, monitoring performance of resilience projects. They are around data, the information. We've even started to talk about data in this conversation today. Innovation. How can we engage stakeholders in knowledge creation? How can we do things more simply when it comes to that funding process? And then some of the other areas, really determining how to support local resilience and defining what success is for resilience and identifying future collaboration. So that's what came from the Research Data and Innovation Subcommittee. Let's go on to the next one. For the Project Prioritization Subcommittee, within these 3 different themes, we have a few different common topic areas. When it comes to driving towards outcomes, you'll see it varies here. Developing an implementation plan that's focused on funding and policy, looking long-term, looking at project options, developing metrics to help determine those outcomes. And then in terms of supplying actionable impact data, coordinate, interagency management, improving that, utilizing the information we have, historic, real-time, and future conditions data. And then identifying the flood resilience needs, different ideas around developing a needs assessment, and again, engaging and supporting localities to identify their needs. So already you start to see within these common topic areas, there could be some that are in more than one subcommittee, and that's what we're going to get to today. Third subcommittee, the funding subcommittee. Within these 4 themes, we had several common topic areas. Taking a look, tracking real estate, leveraging financial data from impacts and projects, and again, establishing flood resilience metrics. There's metrics coming up. Making that financial case, again, considering around metrics and impacts to private and public property. When it comes to the theme of documenting opportunities for state support, we've got 4 common topic areas. Addressing challenges with the reimbursement-based grants, identifying opportunities for public-private partnerships, and then getting along into the 4th theme, providing the guidance and information, helping to make sure everything's clear and consistent, again, around the funding guidance. So a lot of these pieces are starting to come alive when you look through these common topic areas. The 4th subcommittee for outreach and coordination. Within those 3 themes of encouraging plan uptake, enhancing coordination, understanding the stakeholders, there are 4 particular common topic areas, and you'll see some overlap among them. So identifying the funding opportunities again, coordinating interagency activities. Everyone is looking towards meaningful engagement, which is wonderful. And then building the trust relationships within understanding our stakeholders, using clear, consistent messaging. Great, so this is the overview of them. And now for the next slide, we're actually going to do something maybe a little less traditional within the larger TAC meeting, but we'd like you to unmute your mic if you are a member. And we'd like to have a little bit of discussion about what it is we're about to show you. So feel free to jump in. You can also use the chat, but feel free to have some active conversation. And what we're about to show you are some areas of overlap that we've identified. And this is the first time all of you are seeing these areas of overlap. So we're asking for you to look at these overlaps and see if you agree it makes sense to be able to coalesce some of these common topic areas and maybe move them into one particular subcommittee or another. Let's go to the next slide. So here are our first two movements from the Research, Data, and Innovation Subcommittee for areas of overlap that we think might be able to go into a different subcommittee. So here they are. And if you're referring to your handout, you'll see that the particular recommendations are numbered or lettered and numbered, so you can find them there. So on the left side, you'll see particular common topic areas that are in the Research, Data, and Innovation Subcommittee right now. That's A1, 2, A2, 3, and A3, 2. And because they involve research local challenges and lessons learned from other states, provide data-related training and incorporate customer feedback, and then engage stakeholders in knowledge creation, we're thinking it could make sense to move those to be cared for by the Outreach and Coordination Subcommittee. So how does that sound to all of you? Just focused on those particular common topic areas. Does it make sense if you're on the Research, Data, and Innovation Subcommittee that it's okay to move those topics into Outreach and Coordination for further discussion in the next quarter?
I'll jump in first as a member of the research subcommittee. I'm going to say that's a definite no on A12 and A32. I think creating a mechanism for collaboration may be important, but as we're talking about research and engagement in creation of new knowledge, that is something that is very, very different, particularly in systematic documentation, social science context, than the one-way outreach, let's have some meetings and kind of sort of gather some things, then systematically documenting and drawing conclusions. What we've seen so far in outreach is frankly very much a one-way street. It's pushing information out. It's not establishing that, two-way exchange. And I'm also concerned that, we lose that systematic documentation that is critically needed, not only within Virginia, but to feed up nationally.
Okay, so the systematic documentation, there's a different approach, right? I think, Jessica, we can say there's a different approach for how the Research, Data, and Innovation Subcommittee is thinking about this topic versus how one would think the Outreach and Coordination Subcommittee is speaking or thinking about the topic. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We're thinking of, certainly I was thinking of, actual rigorous analysis. Okay. Outreach and coordination, frankly, what's been done in the state so far is, we're going to go out and we're going to push information out to get people's buy-in for the plan. Those are two extremely different modes of engagement.
Okay. And Mr. Rupert also in chat agrees that this should stay within research, data, and innovation.
Yeah, and this is Mark. I particularly with the A1-2, as Thomas said, and really even mostly the second half of that one, the lessons learned from other states. Our discussion around that was going to be a pretty deep dive
Okay.
into we didn't actually point fingers at who was going to do that deep dive, but that at the very least, I think, is not an outreach thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and I, also highlighting in particular, where we are in the what I consider the gold standard of research and engagement. It's very, very rare that research and resilience now is either done or funded in complete and total isolation with what the end users need. There is growing scholarly evidence that what happens when you develop data, tools, ideas in a complete vacuum of who's going to use it, it ends up being a completely useless study that exists only in the peer-reviewed literature and never gets used. So that, A32 really is getting at, what the research funding agencies and even implementation oriented funding streams from federal agencies beyond NSF. I'm thinking NOAA, I'm thinking EPA, I'm thinking even FEMA now, is that standard of co-production of research to ensure that we are not spending research dollars in a way that never results in an actual use case. And I think, one example from the Nature-Based Design Forum that Khalil Kettering shared when we held that meeting in Hampton Roads last month. Those of you who don't know him, he's, with the Nature Conservancy and involved in a lot of their natural and nature-based design. He stood up and said, I've been working in this field 10 years and I can't point to one single instance where any of the tools we've developed has been used in making a decision. That's 10 years of missed opportunity. So if it's something that we need to continue to call out, and we need to continue to set the national standard in Virginia for making sure that the research we're doing is not only useful and usable, but gets used.
Okay. And Thomas, go ahead.
Thank you. I really do agree with a lot of that, Jess. I think what I would add is that I'm not so sure it can't be an outreach and coordination, but there would definitely, if it were to be there, it would have to include much more input from the research, data, and innovation, because I think they need to be working together on that, because I think that you're absolutely right. Historically, we're not doing a good job of integrating the research with the outreach and coordination. And if outreach and coordination is indeed just going out and trying to garner support for what's already been done, then I think that is a missed opportunity. So your points are extremely well taken, but I might even want to see it in outreach and coordination if outreach and coordination were integrated enough with the concerns and the approaches used in research, data, and innovation.
And Troy has his hand up. Go ahead, Troy.
Thanks, Linda. Kind of a process question a little bit right here. So I think what I've just taken from this conversation is, and I sit on the research subcommittee, that you're seeing these sort of social science, human dimensions pieces bubbling up in that research list as well, which are some of these, and also sort of some of the methods, the co-production of knowledge methods of engaging with community and generating that knowledge. And so in a process question, you're saying we're going to have 3 to 5 recommendations per category. And this feels a little bit like we're taking some of the social science recommendations out of research and dropping it in outreach, and then hoping that, because they have their own recommendations here too, and everybody has more than 3 to 5. So is the scale of a recommendation exactly like A1-2. That's one recommendation. A2-3. So this would be 3 recommendations out of your 3 to 5. You could end up in the report. If that's the case, I'm a little worried that also we're going to lose a lot. And some of the devils and some of the really important information here is in these details. And so kind of curious how we're going to capture that in a report. Maybe it's an attachment or something that gets into the details of what these recommendations are calling for.
And it's true, when you look at these, what you see on the screen, so A1-2, that is a common topic area. So there are recommendations within the common topic area. So it says recommendation A. That would be, that particular recommendation A would be what would be moved. And so, again, because we have the big picture coming down to specific language for a recommendation, there are many different pieces to consider. When we think about each of the subcommittees came up with 30 raw recommendations, we're looking at trying to coalesce those 30, let's say down to 3 to 5 for that subcommittee.
Linda, this is Louis. Let me ask you a question in this space. There's a need for research for the sake of research. That's what researchers do. But there are needs that need to be researched that researchers are not doing. And a lot of that has to do with who's going to pay them to do the research. So even if you identify that there's a research need, if no one will provide the funding, the research isn't going to happen because they don't work for free. So you may need a little bit of clarification in there about what do you mean by research for the sake of research? Is it pure scientific research, or is it what Troy was talking about, which is the human dimension components of this? And the second that you kind of jam that innovation in there, that really ripples through, because that generally is no longer research for the sake of research.
And so hearing Louis and hearing all of you, it sounds like there may be more need for coordination among the subcommittees as we're headed towards what the recommendations are.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, Louis, it's honestly both. And you know, the real space where, you know, certainly Thomas, his experience in Florida and my experience in other states as well, have seen is a lot more of this recognition that moving toward useful and usable research that gets used means that it is both. There is a scientific component, there's a social science component, but there's also a service component. So A23, if we were federal agencies talking about this at the federal level, we would phrase as climate services. If we take a look at what's happening in those discussions that are happening at the federal level, that interaction between training and incorporating that feedback to make sure that whatever tools are being created are actually mapping to the decisions that are being made, that's a continuous iteration between end users and the producers of information to create that as a service. That doesn't neatly bin in research, data, and innovation, but it also doesn't neatly bin in outreach and coordination either.
Okay, so let's talk about this in a big picture sense, because right now we don't have time to dive into all of the different details around those overlaps. However, what we are talking about at this moment is, hey, we need some more time together in some way to be able to coordinate on these. So we were talking about possibly moving a topic over. It sounds like what we should be talking about is which topics of overlap exist where some kind of further coordination needs to happen between these subcommittee members. So let's think about it in that way. Let's give you 2 options.
Yeah, Linda, can I throw something in there? Because I like what you just said. You know, thinking the process, there's a couple of processes here. One is getting to December and having the report done. When the report's done, for the sake of argument, if A12 is sitting under the research subcommittee or the outreach subcommittee, it still comes out as the same recommendation, because the actual work gets done after that. I don't mean, I mean, the work to do, for instance, really
make
do
it
a dive
happen.
on the lessons learned from other states. That's not happening between now and December. That's saying, that's a roadmap for going forward. So maybe we were worried too much about which bin we put it in.
Okay. And so, and really, it could be, I guess, Matt, let me ask you this question. We're aiming towards about 20 recommendations. I'm assuming for the purpose of not having it be too large in terms of what can be done as a recommendation, in terms of that pile or packet of recommendations. So could you speak for a moment, Matt, just on the number of 20? What happens if there's more?
Sure, Linda. Yeah, you're right. Right now we have, I think, 124 discrete recommendations. We're trying to and these recommendations are part of these meeting materials. They're part of the public record. We've heard them, we've seen them, and they're not disappearing and kind of just getting recycled and thrown away. We've heard what the needs are. Now we're trying to identify what are the most important recommendations that we should put forward in the plan that can be the most impactful, most urgent over these next 5 years. And I think to Mark's point, taking a recommendation to action, that would be a next step based on what we've heard. But right now we're just trying to get hearing from you all what's most important. The recommendations themselves can be consolidated, and not consolidated and watered down, but can be kind of a recommendation can come out as what we're putting here as a topic, where it has bullets underneath or sub information underneath. So we're trying to see what makes sense where, and if we can get to the 3 to 5 number, was trying to get it to kind of a manageable spot and trying to see what's most important, and what is most critical for us to move forward. And I think we're here today to hear your feedback. And we have some ability to pivot and adjust based on the feedback we've received from you all today. And then we're also going to learn more when we put these recommendations out for your survey, and asking you to prioritize them to see what's most important, so that we can prepare for the next subcommittee meeting. Because at the end of the day, we do need to get agreement on recommendations that we can vote out of subcommittee and that are also voted on at the TAC to make their way into the plan. And so that's what's key for this part of the process, is getting these recommendations into the plan. Then beyond that is trying to get the support. Louis mentioned funding, who's going to pay for enacting or enabling some of these recommendations into action to move those forward. Those are next steps, but really we're trying to, what is most important to do, the granularity of it, we will work through, and that's part of the next subcommittee meeting with you all. As far as the reason we were trying to assign it to one subcommittee or another is just based on the limited time that we have in our meetings. We have 2 more subcommittee meetings, 2 more TAC meetings to try to get to our end goal. So we're trying to figure out a way, instead of having both subcommittees talk about a very similar topic, yes, from different perspectives, trying to make sure we're using our time as efficiently as possible, but still getting effective results at the end. And so there's one of the opportunities is subcommittee members from research, data, and innovation or outreach and coordination could attend one of the other subcommittee meetings to continue to provide input on a topic that they're very passionate about. But again, we're here to hear your feedback so that we can try to develop the plan and refine it to move forward in these next 2 quarterly meetings.
And so it may be a bit more about process that we want to discuss right now in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes. And I see both Troy and then Jessica have their hands up.
hang on before Linda, if I could just jump in really fast, because I've got to hop here, but I want to reiterate what Matt Dallin said about the need to get to some point where we can winnow the list of 120 something down to something that is manageable for this group to turn out a product by the end of the year, because I think the last thing we want is for all this stuff to just get so bottled up that nothing useful comes out of it, or that we put so many things out that are overlapping that it becomes noise. So I think that's kind of the purpose of this exercise. So
Great.
Thanks, Matt. That's really helpful. Both Matts, that's really helpful because I think what I'm hearing there, and this might be your process, right, is that we're kind of creating thematic areas of recommendations. We're not creating specific recommendations, but you may still want to capture this list and capture that detailed list and put it somewhere. Maybe it's on the website outside the report, because to take it that actionable step where a researcher is going to say, I'm addressing this particular topic and it's a priority issue in Virginia, and here's my point to a policy document that's saying it's important. At the thematic area, it's too generic, and the funder is not going to see that is indeed a priority. So it's as we generalize and create thematic areas, it may be more recommendation themes rather than specific recommendations, but then keeping the detail somewhere and have it published somewhere so that researchers can point to it would be helpful.
And we are, Troy, you're correct. You're most correct, because right now, just to discuss, we're using these common topic areas, but the recommendations themselves that go into the report, into the plan, they're going to be specific recommendations. It's just that we didn't want to have to talk about 120 of them today, right? So that's why these particular common topic areas exist. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so process-wise then, and if I think, again, about where are plans successful in other states at either the state or the local level, the plans that are getting executed, which is what we want, right, are the ones where we've got somebody as a champion identified who is going to be responsible for carrying this out. If these are themes, then there's maybe got to be a way that those are general, in a way that multiple entities who may end up being responsible see themselves as saying, all right, I'm the steward of this for the next 4 years. Or are we more specifically saying, all right, DCR owns this is a recommendation for DCR? Can we clarify who ultimately is going to be the responsible, how are we supposed, who are we supposed to be informing with these recommendations, and who's going to be the one the next 4 years who we want to make sure we see as responsible for carrying these through?
Okay. That's great. So that's something we can do. Who we're going to be able to clarify for every recommendation, who is the audience for that? Who is responsible for that recommendation? In order to help make sure that happens, right? Somebody is championing that. Okay, so just in the next couple minutes, what I'd like to ask all of you to do is great conversation. What we can do is take a look, because we've got 4 slides. You can react to them just like you did. Hey, no, I want to keep that. That's really important. How does this one look from the Research Data and Innovation subcommittee if this common topic area of A26, identify critical data needs and plan for funding, if that is joined in some way with what the project prioritization subcommittee is doing? So, and do I hear from you, you don't want to move, so RDI subcommittee, there's nothing that you've put out so far that you feel should move to a different subcommittee, is that correct?
I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but on this A26, because again, it's lump things that are needs a plan for funding.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm neutral on that.
Is anyone else, so anyone else who is on the RDI subcommittee, feel strongly about whether that particular theme, oh, sorry, common topic area, A26, would be shepherded by the project prioritization subcommittee. Okay. So it sounds like that is possible, that that could move over to, thank you for using the chat, everyone, too. We could move that one over to project prioritization. Let's go on to the next slide. Matt, should we take a break now or finish this in 5 minutes and then take a break? Would that be okay?
I think if we can finish this and then we'll
Okay.
take it.
So we're gonna do a quick movement through this here. For the project prioritization subcommittee members, here are two particular common topic areas that could move to those different subcommittees. Take a look at that. Develop an implementation plan focused on funding policy. Would that make sense to you that the funding subcommittee could shepherd that? So anyone here from project prioritization?
Yes, I think so. Connecting funding with project prioritization will
Okay.
need to be done at some point.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, anyone else feel strongly from the project prioritization subcommittee?
This is Whitney. I guess so. It's just, I think it depends on what you do with the funding group, because that's a lot.
It is.
If we're
okay.
looking at ways to identify funding versus prioritize projects. Anyway, sorry, I'm just struggling with this whole process, but it could be either one.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Louis. This gets more and more complicated with no real endpoint because the committee, the funding committee, can't implement anything. None of these committees can implement anything. You know, it's all implemented by, well, I mean, the state could choose to do projects. There are, you know, the PDCs could choose to do projects. Local governments could choose to do projects. But the funding subcommittee also can't direct where money goes. You can only make recommendations. So mashing this stuff together may make sense on paper, but how do you pull it off? That's a totally different question.
Right. Now that's true of any of the recommendations, right, Louis? I mean, these become recommendations, but then they start with an action verb, but taking them into action is a different topic of conversation.
Right.
Okay. How about, so it sounds like that could go to funding to shepherd. How about B33, engage and support localities to identify needs, going to the outreach and coordination subcommittee? Anyone from project prioritization have issue if that is shepherded by outreach and coordination?
I might come at this from the inverse since I'm on the funding committee and I think Sean's on here.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we, as the funding subcommittee, be tasked with engaging and supporting localities to identify needs? I'm not sure if that makes
that one's not going to, sorry, that one's not going to funding. So B33 on the right, that one would go to outreach and coordination.
Outreach and coordination. Okay. All right.
That's good. That's a good check. I'm glad you spoke up. So yes, engage and support localities to identify needs, going to outreach and coordination from project prioritization.
Well, I think the better question is to ask people in outreach coordination if that's what they would do.
Something you can take on as part of your discussions with, so outreach and coordination, anyone from outreach and coordination who's on today, what are your thoughts about taking on engage and support localities to identify needs? There's 3 recommendations that could come to you to be thinking about in your list of recommendations. Anyone from outreach and coordination on right now? To unmute. Okay.
Well,
Um,
it shows up if you don't come to the meeting, you might get stuck with a new task.
That's right.
So I do want to point out that these are areas that we identified overlap. So this isn't an idea that we're saying, you know what, this should just be outreach and coordination. This isn't a gap in outreach and coordination. This is an overlap in that outreach and coordination has similar recommendations. And we think they should be taking the lead on refining and revising this recommendation topic area. So it is not gap, and this isn't new for outreach and coordination. They're already working on this. It's just let's group these similar items under one subcommittee and then have them try to move it forward.
Well, and from a process perspective, then Linda and Matt, you guys will want to watch at the end here, right? If when this gets dropped into one of the other committees, they merge it, morph it a little bit to align with some of the ways they've been thinking about and framing this. Did we lose the essence of the recommendation that came from the original committee? Because there's a potential that these become recommendations that go to die in a different subcommittee because they're not aligning well enough with what came out of those subcommittees.
Right. And so we can be sure about that. And at the same time, so in some ways it could be changed, or it could wither, or it could grow, right? All of those possibilities are there. So again, it seems to be about process right now. And so about process, let's go ahead and look. I want to show you the last two slides here for a moment, just quickly. So for funding, we're looking at needing coordination to go to the project prioritization piece about establishing flood resilience metrics and about enhancing evaluation metrics and methods to increase impact. That's something that could go towards project prioritization. Just like on the right, engaging with legislators and special interest groups could go under outreach and coordination in terms of how that could fit. I want to go to the last of these slides, the fourth one. Outreach and coordination, it looked like there were two areas that could overlap that were identified in outreach and coordination that could go into the funding piece for funding subcommittee. And that's identify funding opportunities. And then the other is identify capacity constraints and build support. So in terms of process, let's go on to the very next slide. We're going to skip gaps for a second and go to here. When we're looking at coordination here, we want to send a survey for each subcommittee member to complete in July. And that survey is going to be listing all of the raw recommendations that you had to ask you for an initial prioritization within the subcommittee of what you think is most important. Then from there, we'll be able to refine your top recommendations in the Q3 discussion. They don't get eliminated through that survey in any way. It's just to start that prioritization process. So when we get together in Q3, it'll give you a place to begin with. And so we can discuss this further without having to refine it further today about the movement of those recommendations. And then the other aspect of this is that we want to make sure all of the subcommittee members see the other recommendations, like you have them right now, just in draft in raw form. We want to make sure that continues going forward, that you are having a chance to coordinate between those. So we'll think about the best ways to do that. Okay. Anyone have anything to mention, anything that comes to mind? You can either mention it now or put it in chat around process or thoughts. And then the last thing that I would ask of you, and we can take a break for a few minutes, Matt. Let me just ask that while you are on break, think about any gaps that might exist between all of these different recommendations from the different subcommittees. So is there an overall recommendation, big picture gap that didn't come up anywhere? Again, you've got those different themes and common topic areas and specific recommendations in your 12-page handout. Is there something that's missing? Is there something, there's a gap across the subcommittees? Is there something within a subcommittee you feel like within your subcommittee, oh, we should have been talking about this one? And just think about that while we take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, I just ask that you put any gaps you could think of into the chat. Thanks. Back to you, Matt.
All right, thanks, Linda. All right, we're gonna go ahead and take a 10-minute stretch and break. So we'll resume the meeting at 10:50 a.m. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in 10 minutes. Resume the Technical Advisory Committee. So just wanted to pick up where we left off. And now that you had some time to hopefully think about some of the recommendations and look through the handout and all the recommendations that we have to date, are there any gaps that any of the members wish to discuss at this time? Okay, I did want to mention that each subcommittee was sent their own list of recommendations when we sent out the meeting minutes from the subcommittee meetings. And each subcommittee had the opportunity to add, edit, or revise some of the recommendations from their subcommittee. We did receive input, so thank you for those members that did provide us with some additional recommendations and clarifications. Those are included in the handouts, and those new additions that were added after the meeting are italicized to show that those were additional recommendations added after the fact. If you identify any gaps in the recommendations, again, big picture, if you think there's a gap in somebody else's subcommittee or within your own, we would need to have you send those to us by the end of this week so that we can prepare for the survey and refine the process so that we can get these recommendations prioritized so that we can get that priority list included in the plan document itself. So before we move on to our next set of slides, are there any other comments or items for discussion regarding our subcommittee recommendations? All right, I'm not hearing any. I don't see any new items in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and move forward to the new business items. In this section, we wanted to provide an update on the plan products, get into a little bit more detail on those. We have an update on the TAC and subcommittee schedule, and then there's another opportunity for TAC member discussion or any updates from any of the members themselves on work that they are doing. So I wanted to talk about our plan products. Mentioned this earlier in the presentation that the plan is being delivered in both a PDF plan document, which is really our top level document that will be of similar size, if not shorter, than our phase 1 document. We have the Web Explorer that is another level of detail that can provide more information at different scales. So these are all complementing each other. And then we have all the underlying data and information that's not being published, but it is available for use by others. So we're trying to publish as much data as we can on our open data portal, but we are also here to provide assistance if the plan document and Web Explorer does not meet your specific use case. There is underlying data that we can help provide you with to help meet that use case so that this work and information is incorporated into your efforts as well. So I did want to go through and give you kind of an overview of where we're at with the plan document itself and the Web Explorer. We've heard your feedback and been soliciting it through the end user survey, as well as through other stakeholder engagement. So that has informed where we're at now, but there's still some opportunities for additional input, or if you want to highlight certain points of emphasis that you feel are important in these components, please let us know. So first up is our plan document. This is the PDF plan document. We will have also be producing hard copies as well that we can distribute. The purpose of this document is really to take all of the information that we have and present it in a compelling story and narrative, both of the challenges that we face and the opportunities that exist to try to meet these challenges. One of the big additions that we want to put in to this document, based on some of the input that we've heard from you all, is highlight the existing efforts that are going on. While DCR is leading this coastal resilience master planning effort, we are definitely not the only ones existing in this space. There are others who are here before us and continue to exist in this space and are doing great work. So that's one of the additional items we want to add to the document itself, is to highlight these additional efforts, let people know where there's other resources and efforts going on, to really champion the work that you all are doing and our other stakeholders are doing. The plan document, its primary audience is really the planning district commissions, localities, and state agencies. Those are our primary actors for implementation. So it is geared towards them to help support the work that they do. What we're hoping to get out of this document is sharing this information, leading to increased coordination across levels of government on the work that we're doing, but also helping to implement some of the resilience projects and initiatives, and taking these plans and ideas and giving additional support to move those ideas into action, to try to increase either the political will, help educate decision makers, especially those that control funding, to identify the need and the opportunities that exist within this space. So we have our 5 key elements again. So where is it flooding? What are the impacts? What are we doing about it? What are some of the financial needs? And then your all's recommendations. Those are the key elements that we have in the document, but we don't want to just present them necessarily in that format, and that's going to be the document. So the organization that we've done for this document: executive summary, introduction up front, letting people know what's new about the plan, what we've accomplished. The biggest shift in our organization is splitting out kind of the statewide plan perspective and what we're doing to advance flood resilience and coastal resilience, and then having consolidated regional resilience profiles. So individual PDC perspectives, and having those kind of next to each other, because we understand there's different use cases, and trying to present that type of information together, because we think they have different end users and use cases. So a little bit more detail on what we're trying to cover in those different sections and the different perspectives that we're providing. So at our regional scale, trying to really identify what are the major flooding concerns, and what is the regional context at that scale. So seeing what rises to the top as far as impacts and the concerns that we face, and then looking large scale at what are the projects and initiatives that we have in the database. What are people wanting to do? What are some of those common themes? Carolyn discussed earlier in the presentation about how we're looking at reviewing those projects and initiatives, but at this scale, and then trying to explore some of the financial opportunities, both through some of the impacts and those economic impacts, as well as what has been done, what has been working, and what could be maybe shared across region to help succeed and really implement and build flood resilience across the Commonwealth. Within the individual PDC perspective sections, there's an introduction to the region. We had similar sections in phase 1, although they were at the master planning region level, which combined multiple PDCs. Here, this is an individual PDC perspective for the region. What are the major flooding concerns within that region? the impacts within that region, and then highlighting some of the regional flood stories, both what is being done by others, what have we heard from the stakeholders, from individuals about how flooding impacts them, and try to provide more story and narrative to this section. And then in our success stories, trying to pull in from our projects and initiatives what people want to do, as well as what people have done in these regions, to highlight what is working, to better try to move this forward within those individual sections. So trying to address some of the items that we've heard in our end user survey is kind of what why we've structured it in this manner based on the input that we've received to date. So I just wanted to, I know we have multiple organizations here. We have the PDCs. I'm curious to know if you all are supportive of having kind of your own individual sections after the state perspective, which will be geared more towards the state agencies and those operating at a larger scale. So I know we had, I saw Louis, Whitney, Andrew, Brianna, some of our PDC members. Are you supportive of this kind of organization of the document and having your own section after the fact? We do plan on engaging you in the review process, so that we are trying to meet your needs in your regions and trying to tell and put forward the most compelling and impactful information to try to build the political will, educate the public, and meet your other kind of use cases that you've identified to date. Any of the PDCs have any thoughts or comments on this?
I was just going to say, I think that the flow makes sense. I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Okay, thank you, Brianna.
And I think one thing we do need to include is areas in our PDCs that aren't included as part of the flood hazard impact. For instance, half of our PDC wouldn't be included in it because half of our PDC drains into a different watershed. And so it's not affected through the Chesapeake Bay, which is where our focus is.
Okay, so we are, and this has been something that we're working on in trying to put emphasis that this is a resilience plan for the coastal region, and it does include all aspects of your region through our pluvial flood hazard analysis and the fluvial. We are looking at all localities within your PDC.
Okay.
So we will have impacts for them. The impacts per locality, we're also going to have impacts at the town level. That'll be summarized at least in the Web Explorer. We're waiting to get initial results back from the impact analysis to figure out how we present it in the plan document itself, and not just put all of the same types of information in there just because we have it, but trying to filter through the information to find what's most impactful and compelling, and putting that information forward in the PDF document and having additional levels of detail available to explore in the Web Explorer.
Matt, this is Louis. If you're thinking that you're going to want local elected officials as one of the primary audiences to read what's going on inside of their PDC, the more that you can lean into the protection of public health, safety, and welfare, and recognizing that water presents a clear and present danger to their tax base, that's going to more quickly get their attention, because it gets right down to the core of why local government even exists.
Thank you, Louis. No, this is what we in our outreach and engagement summary sheet, you'll see there was the PDC interviews that haven't started, and we've met with many of you all to date, but want to have an additional follow-up to make sure we are tailoring that message to meet your regional needs, because we do understand the pain points are different in the different regions and are trying to cater these different sections to meet your needs as best as possible.
Following up on Louis, will there be any flood response activities reported on what PDCs or other localities are doing to connect it back to hazard mitigation and like get that integration?
So as far as response activities, we are going to be linking it to what's in the projects and initiatives database. So what does this region want to do and is planning on doing? But can you I guess be more specific on the response activities that you're...
Yeah, I was there. Well, I was holding the belief that the CRMP is trying to integrate with other local hazard mitigation plans. And to assess flood hazard, we also need to know like the ability to bounce back and the resiliency. So that's how well a locality or a county has, you know, sub-dam teams going around or emergency teams. That sort of response would factor into the greater picture.
Okay, thank you. I think that gets to kind of understanding the different capacities and capabilities that exist. And that's been identified as a need that we want to try to include. It's just trying to get that data is not readily available at scale across the whole project area. So I think where we can incorporate some of that in the narrative and qualitative form and learn through our PDC interviews, try to capture some of that, as well as pull in potentially from the regional hazard mitigation plans that exist.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so our Web Explorer is the kind of next level of detail that has some more flexibility because it's an online viewer and different users can go in and pan to different areas. So one of the key purpose here is to help share and highlight some of the data that we have available for localities for planning purposes, as well as to different PDCs. And kind of to pique their interest, not only what's available just through the Web Explorer, and they might be able to use some of those products off the shelf in their planning purposes, but to help identify where there's additional information that can help support their needs and that they have an opportunity to work with us through some technical assistance for us to get them that data and make its way into their planning products as well as other uses that they have. So again, similar audience, but just a slightly different purpose with having the ability to move around and try to key in some of the different levels of the data that we have. Also sharing similar desired results with the coordination on showing where the different projects and initiatives are so that people can see what others are doing and that have been successful and try to understand how they did it, as well as what other needs are and potentially linking some of those needs across jurisdictional boundaries. I think Carolyn mentioned earlier kind of resilience design standards, and if we have multiple different regions working on different resilience design standards, trying to help that coordination by identifying that's going on in two different places and trying to link that up, as well as providing that data and information, again trying to influence decision making. And so having data informed decision making, and this is being a way to help provide some of that information that exists. Again, we'll have the same 5 key elements that we have in PDF plan, just presenting it in more of a visual form through maps as well as graphical data summaries, similar to what we've had on our phase 1 Web Explorer. We did hear that there is a lot of information, almost too much at times. So we are working on trying to improve the user experience making it a little bit more intuitive, as well as trying to provide some additional information on what this data actually means, where did it come from, and linking back to some of our other resources, so people, if they want to dig in deeper, that those additional resources are readily available. Another advancement that we're making in phase 2 is beyond just political summarization, which does go down to the town level now. So previously we did not have towns included in our data summarization, but that will be an added feature for the update. We're also going to have the ability to summarize data at different watershed levels. So we did the pluvial modeling at the sub HUC 12 level. I think our HUC 12 is our smallest scale of summarization, and then looking to roll that up into 1 or 2 higher levels in the watershed scale. So we can look at it through different perspectives. And again, that can lead towards regional collaboration, and that this isn't just a problem within my political jurisdiction, but this is really a watershed-wide impact, especially when we start looking at the pluvial and fluvial side, and that trying to drive towards more watershed-based solutions by having the watershed-based data available. And all of this kind of having these different scalable areas of interest where we can zoom in and see very localized data and impacts, or flood hazards down to the 10-foot resolution, but also being able to scale out and see relative comparisons against different watersheds and against different political jurisdictions to see where is the relativity of the impacts. We do know that that is a challenge on how you create the relative impacts, where total population would be skewed towards the more urban areas. So we are looking at normalizing some of that, as looking at kind of percentage of population or percentage of buildings within a jurisdiction to be able to have that relative comparison against whether it's a watershed or a political subdivision, so that we can be able to slice the data in different ways so that it is more useful for end products. We know that we will not meet everybody's use case or need with what we produce in the plan document or the Web Explorer, but we're trying to meet as many as possible, especially for our key audiences. And then we are here to provide technical assistance to get this data and understand specific use cases after we deliver the plan, to try to get this information into the hands of the people that need it, into the form that they need it and want to use it. So there is more than just what we put in the plan document and the Web Explorer, but these are 2 key deliverables that we need to deliver at the end of the year. Any questions or comments on the plan document or the Web Explorer? See, there's one chat. Thanks, Wheeler, for we got public comment coming up in a little bit. Okay, so we are moving forward with the document outline, the Web Explorer framework, and we'll provide additional updates at the next meetings. We have the remainder of our full TAC and subcommittee meetings scheduled. You should have received calendar invitations for your subcommittees and the TAC. These are in-person meetings, and based on, I mean, the focus, especially of our subcommittee meetings, will be to revise and refine our subcommittee recommendations. We highly encourage in-person attendance to the most practical extent that you can be there. There are allowable exceptions for remote participation, and we will continue to host these in-person meetings in a hybrid format, but we do strongly encourage in-person participation. If you can do that, it would be greatly appreciated. If you are not able to attend in person, we do ask that you notify the chair as well as DCR staff at least a week in advance, the sooner the better, so that we can prepare the facilitation process to meet the needs of the subcommittee members. So if we have a large contingency that are going to be attending remotely, we need to try to plan and prepare for that accordingly. So please let us know as soon as possible, but at least a week in advance if you're not able to attend in person and will be attending virtually. You will see that there's only 3 orangish yellow dates highlighted for subcommittees. The research, data, and innovation and funding subcommittees are going to be are held on the same day, August 15th and October 10th, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. So we're not missing anything here, but these are the final dates, which get us to our end of the year delivery, December 31st. Any comments or questions on the schedule? Okay. Next up is opportunity for any TAC member discussion and updates. I believe Sean from VRA has an update to provide. Sean, you want to?
Yes, thanks, Matt. At the funding subcommittee, it was mentioned more than once that it is wonderful that all this funding is available either through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Inflation Reduction Act, state ARPA dollars, etc. But some of the smaller units of government, even if it's a grant, implementation starts to become difficult when you're waiting for reimbursements, etc. And different grant programs have different requirements. Sometimes all the funding comes at project completion or it's quarterly, yet you may have contractors that are expecting payment on a monthly basis. And it just becomes more and more difficult to simply cash flow that project. So at the June VRA board meeting, the board of directors authorized a small line of credit program that will allow like planning district commissions or towns at least a little bit of cash flow relief from the program. So it is interest bearing, yes, but it's more efficient than going through a bank. So that was just approved. It's a first come first basis until the funds are depleted, and there's about $5 million available, and we're thinking that the lines of credits would be no more than $500,000. Applications are going to be available on VRA's website. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you, Sean. It's exciting to hear about that. Are there any other members that would like to provide an update on work they're doing, or to discuss what we've have further discussions on what we covered today? Not seeing anybody raise their hand or enter into the chat. So we'll go ahead and move into our next section, which is the public comment period. If there's any members of the public that are on the meeting today that wish to provide public comment, please let us know using the chat window, and we can take you off mute and let you address the committee. Wheeler, have we had anybody sign up?
No one has expressed an interest for public comment in the chat.
Okay. All right. If there is nothing else, then we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Can we get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Can we get it seconded? Troy?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much for meeting with us today. We will be sending out some more information regarding subcommittee recommendations. And we'll be in touch and look forward to meeting with you all again in August. Thank you and take care. Have a good day.
Thank you all so much. Have